on his way. Devil is on his way. Devil is on his way, motherfucker. The devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees. Devil is on his way. Fall to your knees. Devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees. Devil is on his way.
Mountain Murders is an Appalachian true crime podcast. Some content may not be suitable for all listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
We say fuck a lot. Hey y'all, welcome back to Mountain Murders. I'm Heather, and I'm co-hosting along with the ghost of Dylan. Nah, I'm just kidding. He's not here this week. We are trying to get out an episode very late. I apologize, but I wanted to make sure that our Mountain Murders listeners got some content this week. We are still in West Virginia, and I have a very interesting case to bring you. But first, let's do a little housekeeping just to let folks know. If you've been trying to reach me on our Instagram account, Mountain Murders Podcast, I'm very quick to respond to our DMs that we get there. But unfortunately, I have been locked out of that account. Okay, here's what happened. Dylan has been pressing me for like weeks, actually for some months, to get a new phone because my phone is older. And you know how a lot of times these cell phones, like once they get to a certain age, they don't want to hold a battery and they start lagging, blah, blah, blah. You know what I'm talking about. So I had to go break down and get a new cell phone, which I hated to do, but I use it so much for the podcast, had to get me a new phone. And with that, I assumed that all of my passwords and such and apps would be transferred along to my new phone because that's typically what's happened for me in the past. Doesn't seem to be the case. I had to download all of my apps, including Instagram, and when I tried to log into Mountain Murders Podcast, can't remember what the damn password is. This is what happens, I guess, when you get old. Like, I use the same password for everything, which I know is like a major no-no out there. We've probably got like a cybersecurity person yelling at me right now, like, don't do it. I know. But this is why, because I'm so forgetful and I cannot remember my ass from a hole in the ground. And typically, if I change a password, I will log it like in my phone, in the notes section, or in a notebook that I hang on to, something like that. Not the case this time. So I cannot access our Instagram account. I may have to start from square one, which means we will lose 4 years of Mountain Murders Instagram content. I'm very upset about this, but we will do what we have to do. And if that's the case, if I have to create an entirely new Mountain Murders account, I will let you guys know and you can follow me there. Let's discuss a little bit of true crime news. This is out of our home state of North Carolina, and it's such a wild story, and what a freaking nightmare for this homeowner. I cannot imagine waking up to this scene. Thinking it belonged to her ex-boyfriend, a 49-year-old woman set fire to a house in Gold Hill, North Carolina, but it turned out to be the wrong address. Revenge gone wrong. On July 22nd, Christy Louise Jones was arrested and charged with felony first-degree arson, assault with a deadly weapon, and larceny of an animal, and she's being held on a pretty large bond, like $101,500. So the arson report indicates that the fire started sometime around 7:30 a.m. A neighbor saw Jones trying to set the house on fire and woke up the homeowner. The owner went outside to find bundles of wood and a fire on his front porch, which apparently was set with chainsaw oil. Trying to stop the fire spread, the homeowner ran to get his hose, but Jones had already plugged up the end of the hose with Flex Seal, which is a rubberizing agent. I'm sure you're familiar with that. The homeowner saw Jones nearby. She also had his dog on a leash, which if someone tried to steal my dog, I would probably also grab a rifle, which the homeowner did and confronted her. She just mumbled at him, and police allege that she also tried to set the propane tank on the side of the home on fire, and deputies also found that she had cut the exterior of the homeowner's above ground pool. You know what? That's also reason to fight. Don't touch my above ground pool, which I don't have, but if I did, I'd be pretty damn mad if somebody cut it. What the heck? When she heard the sounds of police and fire approaching, Jones allegedly ran to her car and fled, but the homeowner did manage to get the car's license plate number, and police were able to track her to her home where she was handcuffed and arrested. A witness informed deputies that a former boyfriend of Jones's did actually own property in the area, but she did not, obviously go to the correct property. Jones and the owner of the home that was torched don't know each other. Can you imagine? I mean, this to me, like I said, this is a freaking nightmare that a stranger set on revenge comes to your house seeking the fire and brimstone of vengeance, and they try to burn down your house and you're not even the person they're mad at. Yeah, that's not going to work for me. I'd be pretty upset about that. So we'll follow Jones's case, see where that evolves. Wow, just one of those mind-blowing true crime stories that we get sometimes. Today we are in West Virginia, folks. We are still in the wild and wonderful West Virginia, and I have a case for you that is going to be incredibly frustrating for you. And I think a lot of small towns have these cases where it seems like all fingers point to a certain suspect, and there's some evidence, but maybe just not enough evidence. Yeah, so let's get into it. Today we're talking about Jonathan Wesley Skaggs. It was a hot August night in 1999 when Fayette County 911 dispatchers received a call. A woman reported seeing a man's body lying in the road near the intersection of West Virginia 61 and Dempsey Branch Road, near an area known as Oak Hill. Though it wasn't incredibly unusual to find a man in the road, I mean, dispatchers were a bit concerned. I mean, who wouldn't be, right? They thought the man could have been struck by a vehicle or perhaps was somehow seriously injured. An ambulance, along with a deputy from the sheriff's department named J.M. Feltner, were sent to the scene. It was around 12:40 a.m. when Feltner arrived and discovered 24-year-old Jonathan Skaggs heavily inebriated. Skaggs declined medical treatment, so Deputy Feltner sent the ambulance back to its station. Feltner had no reason to arrest the young man, but knew he couldn't leave someone in Skaggs' condition on the side of the road. And who would feel comfortable, especially if you're a law enforcement officer, to just leave this drunk young man on the side of the road? Now, that does sound like a recipe for disaster. So, weighing on his conscience, he's like, I just can't do this. Gotta figure out what to do with this guy. Feltner offers to give him a ride to a safe spot for the night. But Skaggs didn't want to go to his parents' house and instead asked the deputy if he could catch a ride to a neighbor's house who lived about a half a mile away. Alfred Clinton Toney was considered a friend by Jonathan Skaggs, and he lived up Dempsey Branch Road. The deputy drove Skaggs to the Toney residence, watching as the intoxicated young man named Skaggs entered the residence. Now, I can just imagine this scene. Deputy watches him go inside, make sure he gets in safely, and then leaves, right? It was 24 hours later that Skaggs' stepfather, a man named Tommy Bibb, contacted the sheriff's department to file a missing persons report. No one had seen nor heard from Jonathan since Saturday evening. Jonathan's mother and Bibb were concerned about his sudden disappearance. Deputy Feltner spoke to Bibb on the phone, stating that he had seen the young man in the early morning hours of Sunday when he'd responded to a call on Dempsey Branch. Feltner described Skaggs as being drunk, but seemingly okay. Like there wasn't anything wrong with him other than he was intoxicated. So Bibb hangs up the phone feeling a little bit better. Maybe his stepson was with friends, though it was unlike him to have no contact with his family. Like, even if he was hanging out with friends, partying, drinking, what have you, and stayed the night at someone's house, he was a young man who kept in touch with his family. By Tuesday, Jonathan had still not shown up at home, and he'd also failed to pick up his paycheck on Monday. His stepfather once again contacted the sheriff's department, speaking again with Deputy Feltner. On August 17th of 1999, an official missing persons report was filed for Jonathan Wesley Skaggs. The Saturday before his disappearance, Jonathan's stepsister Christina Bibb dropped him off at his father's house on Dempsey Branch. Jonathan then headed out to a party at a girl or a woman named Nicole Thomas's house, and it seems like they were friends, kind of hung out in the same circles. The party hosted roughly 20 people, and Skaggs was noticeably intoxicated at this party. According to Thomas, Skaggs was involved in an altercation with another guest, a man named Sean Tincher. See, I always do it, whether I'm with Dylan or by myself. I can't speak English, apparently. The fight was broken up by another guest named James Jones. So I can also picture this scene, right? You've got a crowd of people, everybody's drinking, and you get that young male testosterone. Maybe nothing happened. He just felt slighted, or maybe there had been some reason to get upset, but they get into this altercation at this party. You've got another guy stepping in, breaking it up. So after the fight, Nicole Thomas asked Skaggs to leave her house. Among the guests were James Jones, as I mentioned, Tincher, Mikkel Ann Miller, and Samantha Obey. Clint Tony had dropped by the party earlier, but he had only stayed a few minutes. Tincher left with Mikkel Ann. I will get this out, I promise. Miller around midnight. So they leave the party together, and the pair see Skaggs lying in the road. Tincher stopped and took a bottle of whiskey that Skaggs had beside him, and they drove away, leaving him in the road. Dick move? I mean, yeah, it is a dick move, right? You see a guy laying in the road, you don't help him. You just take his whiskey and drive off, leaving him there. I mean, that's not cool, right? He could have been hit by a car. Something pretty terrible could have happened to him. But, they'd had the altercation, so I guess Tincher felt like, fuck you, dude. I'm just going to leave you in the road. Well, this pair traveled to Ingram Branch. Miller and Thomas, along with Tincher, confirmed this version of events. So you got 3 witnesses saying, yes, this is what happened. Now, initially, investigators thought Skaggs had fallen down an embankment or could have wandered off and actually did get struck by a vehicle. Jonathan's family was also conducting their own search along the roadway. However, there were no signs of Jonathan. We've got police out there. We've got family. Everyone's walking up and down the road, trying to search the area. Cannot find this young man. No sign of him. Not a shoe, not a shirt, no clue. Now, immediately, all the leads seem to meander back to the homeowner, Clint Tony, the house where Jonathan had been dropped off by the deputy, right? Law enforcement, specifically an officer named Snuffer, interviewed Clint Tony, who said he had not seen Skaggs in quite some time. Baffled by this, Snuffer had known that Deputy Feltner had dropped Jonathan off at this house belonging to Clint Tony. Well, this is going to send up a massive red flag. Law enforcement is already aware that one of their own, this deputy, has dropped Skaggs off at your place, and you're going to turn around and lie to them and say, oh, yeah, I haven't seen him for a really long time. Come on, man. That's going to come back and bite you in the ass. You should always tell the truth, or just don't talk to law enforcement at all, right? I mean, anyway. Deputy Snuffner, who was investigating, he tried to reconstruct Jonathan's evening and whereabouts. He interviewed about 6 people that were, aside from the family members, a lot of the people that were at the party, and searched the roadway near where Skaggs had been found. But again, nothing seems to be leading him anywhere but back to Clint Tony. But what stuck in minds of law enforcement were Clint Tony's answers that didn't seem to match up with anyone else's. So you've got several of these partygoers all telling the same story, and the only person's version of what happened that night is Clint Tony, and it's just not adding up. Clint's mother had passed away about a year before Jonathan's disappearance, and he had been residing in the home on Dempsey Branch, and the house had earned a bit of a reputation while he had taken over as a party pad. There had also been a party held the Saturday before Jonathan disappeared at Clint's house. Now, if you remember, Nicole's having a party, Clint's having a party, and they're all, like, both houses are located only within like a half a mile of each other. Clint even made an appearance at Nicole's party. Right. Guests were kind of going back and forth between Clint's party and Nicole's party. Investigators were getting nowhere, so they decided to interview Clint again. This time, he admitted Jonathan Skaggs had been at his house on the night or the early morning when he had vanished. Clint told investigators they had built a fire pit that night, which was used by the party goers. They were able to throw their debris that they needed to get rid of. So basically, he's like, I invited people over to have this fire party, and that they could bring things like old tires, old wood, furniture, anything they needed to get rid of, old trash that they wanted to burn, and we would just throw it in this fire pit, which caused the fire to burn for several days. He claimed the fire was burning from August 13th through August the 15th. 4 days after Jonathan's disappearance, Tony agreed to a computer voice analysis test when he was asked by investigators about the killing of Jonathan, or do you know who killed Jonathan, or basically, do you know what happened to Jonathan? Any of those questions relating to Jonathan. Tony's voice displayed deception. And we've talked about this a lot on Mount Murders. We feel like those polygraph tests are junk science and they don't really mean a whole lot. But those voice tests, I mean, they're pretty spot on. So we've got this guy seemingly lying. On August 18th, Tony was interviewed a fourth time. He told detectives he might have burned Skaggs in the fire pit at his home. Whoa. What? Well, that took a completely different direction. I mean, at first we've got Tony denying Jonathan had been there. I haven't seen him in some time. To saying, oh, well, I may have burned him in a fire pit? Wow. Investigators spend about 15 hours searching the dump site on the grandmother's property, where they smelled burnt human remains and they found bone fragments in the ash. A cadaver dog was brought in to hunt human remains, which were quickly located. The area was secured as a crime scene. Into the night, investigators combed the area for any evidence, which was bagged and taken to the medical examiner in Charleston. The fire department had to bring out equipment lights so the search could carry on, because they're going into the late night hours and into the early morning trying to locate all of the bone fragments and possible human remains. Big task. By August 21st, a search warrant was executed at Tony's Dempsey Branch residence. Deputies seized several items, including some of the rock fire pit. Sifting through the fire pit, more bone fragments were found, as well as a metal grommet, which had also been located previously at the dump site. So I'm thinking metal grommet, that could be from a shirt, a pair of pants, a jacket. I'm not quite sure. And in my research, I was unable to discover if that was a button from a pair of pants, or like jeans have those metal grommets, or if it came from a shirt. And now that I think about it, that could have also come from a pair of boots. You know, a lot of times, especially work boots, have the metal grommets where you lace your boots up or whatever. Yeah, so I'm not 100% sure. But that was found, as I mentioned, at the dump site, which was at the grandmother's house. Now, the evidence was described, and this is going to blow your mind, as 36 bags of burned material weighing about 350 pounds. Among this debris, they found 5 pounds of human remains, including 2 fragments of a human femur bone with skeletal muscle still attached, and other small bone material. There was also a rusted revolver mixed in with the human remains. The medical examiner sent DNA samples to the Smithsonian Institute for a comparison to Jonathan Skaggs' relatives, so they had to use the familial DNA. While this investigation is happening, a neighbor had told investigators that she had seen Skaggs at the fire pit on the night that he had gone missing, and that she had also seen Tony at the fire pit. He was burning some items, and he told her he was cleaning up and getting rid of stuff he no longer wanted, like an old mattress and a chair. By November, investigators learned from the Smithsonian that the 1,331 bone fragments belonged to one person, and that was Jonathan Skaggs. The report determined that there was a pattern of breakage and fracturing that occurred during the burning, which seemed like an intentional effort to break down the body. Clint Tony is brought in again for questioning. Changing his story once again, Tony said that Skaggs left his house. He had eaten, then gone to bed. When he woke up, there was a foul odor coming from the fire pit. The smell was so intense it caused him to vomit. He witnessed something black in the fire pit, but didn't further check what it was. Instead, he threw some more items on the fire and went back to bed. It only occurred to him later that the black mass in the fire might have been Jonathan's body. According to Tony's story, he seems to be painting a picture that perhaps Jonathan Skaggs had accidentally fallen into the fire pit, which didn't seem to add up to police, especially with the knowledge that Skaggs' body had been severely busted up during the burning. The fire pit, which was made of stone, backed up against a hillside, and it was no more than about 5 feet in diameter. So a guy Skaggs' size, he was 5'7", would not fit into the pit without being folded up, dismembered, or somehow broken into smaller pieces as he was burned. Others had stated the fire at Tony's house was not burning at 3:30 a.m., but by 6:30 a.m., Tony was outside with a roaring fire that he was actively tending. So again, I feel like we're getting kind of different versions of the story from Tony. Initially, he's like, oh yeah, I was having a fire burn party for all my friends. Bring over your shit. So that seems to imply that they were burning these items kind of all night long. But others are saying, no, he hadn't started burning anything. And when we left by around, 3:30 a.m., he still wasn't burning anything. But at 6:30 a.m., he's up, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and has this roaring fire. It just, the story keeps changing, right? Very suspicious. It was on August 5th of 2001 that a West Virginia state policeman named Van Meter interviewed Tony at the Southern Regional Jail. He was in there on different charges. And guess what? Tony's story had grown new legs and walked in a totally different direction. This is what, the 6th or 7th version of a story that we've gotten from this guy? On the night Skaggs was dropped off at his house, Tony alleges that a guy named Jason Reinhardt, Nicole Thomas, and a boy named Sean Andrews, along with a few other folks, were there. And I think Andrews is young, a young teenager, maybe around 13, but I'm not 100% sure on that. When Skaggs arrived, he was pissed off that someone had stolen his liquor, because remember the guy Sean Tincher had taken the liquor from the road? Yeah. Tony insinuated that Skaggs got into an argument with Nicole Thomas and the others about what had happened to his liquor. And that's when Skaggs left for Nicole's house, at which time Tony went to sleep. When he woke up around 4 a.m., there was some loud arguing in the driveway, and he could kind of hear remnants of this conversation, and it seemed to be over that stolen liquor. When Tony looked out the window, he could see Jonathan Skaggs on the ground, being kicked and stomped on by a few men who'd been at the party. Afterwards, the men rolled Skaggs into a blue tarp and tossed him into the fire pit. The body wouldn't fit, so the group used a shovel to push his legs in the pit, then piled tires and other highly flammable materials on top to turn up the fire's intensity. Tony did nothing. The group left, and he just went back to bed. Super casual. I mean, who does that? Okay. The witnesses Tony implicated in his new version of events had all given consistent accounts of that night. He was the only person who kept changing his story. Others had stated seeing the fire burning in the morning, but they had not seen it the night before. The blue tarp, which was allegedly used in the murder, belonged to Clint Tony. Like most small towns, rumors spread throughout the hollers, and people speculated about devil worship, witchcraft, and how Tony attended that evening's party wearing a satanic mask. So I'm not sure what kind of satanic mask. Maybe he was dressed like the devil. I don't know. But people suspected Tony was supplying drugs at the party as well. No arrests were made in this case, and it went cold. In 2004, the prosecutor Paul Blake took the case before a grand jury, but no indictment was returned. 16 years later, in September of 2015, an indictment was finally handed down, charging Alfred Clinton Tony with the murder of Jonathan Skaggs. According to the new prosecutor, quote, "The wheels of justice turn slowly, but they never stop moving forward." Tony's defense team called 12 witnesses to testify on his behalf in 2017 to prove that too much time had lapsed to properly defend their client, as many involved in the original crime had passed away. Wesley Jones, who had been 13 at the time of the murder, said he had been friends with Sean Andrews back in 1999. According to lawyers for both the defense and the prosecution, Andrews was, quote, "missing," and they couldn't locate him. But Skaggs' family said that's not even true. The man, Sean Andrews, was living in Florida, and others had contact with him. According to Jones, Andrews had witnessed the murder and provided information to Jones that it was not Tony who had killed Skaggs, but of course this was hearsay. So we can't really put this guy, Jones, who was 13 at the time, now an adult, can't put him on the witness stand because hearsay doesn't hold up. Tony's aunt, Januda Joyce Foster, testified that Jonathan Skaggs was a frequent visitor at the Dempsey Branch house. A man named James Jones, who had passed away years earlier, had told Foster that Skaggs was dead because Foster, when Jonathan Skaggs went missing, asked Jones, "Are you going to help in the search?" Because family, friends, people, cops were out looking for him. And he was like, "No, I'm not going to help because he's dead." And if you remember, Jones was the one who had broken up the party between Skaggs and Titchener back at Nicole Thomas's house before any of this had gone down. Tony's neighbor, a woman named Shelby Wofford, lived across the street from his residence, and she testified that she had awakened around 2 a.m. on the night in question and had seen a dark-colored, older model car leaving the driveway of Tony's house. Police had never questioned her regarding the crime or if she'd seen anything suspicious. Another man named Mark Lafferty was murdered in April of 2000. Jonathan's uncle, Charles Keenan, was indicted for that murder, eventually pleading to voluntary manslaughter. Police suspected that Keenan's motive for murder may have been a revenge for Jonathan Skaggs' death, but Keenan has since passed away. Witness Wesley Jones had also testified that Sean Andrews confided in him about witnessing Jonathan's murder, and that a man with the initial M had sworn him to secrecy about what he had seen. So could that have been this Mark Lafferty person? We don't know. I guess at this point, we may never know. Deputy Feltner, who picked up Skaggs before his disappearance, was charged with embezzlement later and was also deceased. So it's true, a lot of folks who are witnesses to this crime, or maybe could help solve the puzzle, have passed away. That definitely puts roadblocks up for the prosecution. Another man named Russell Weiss, who had been in a motorcycle accident in 1999, had his leg in a splint. He couldn't drive, so a woman named Amber Bunting had given him a ride over to Tony's house the day of Skaggs' disappearance. When he arrived, he described Tony's house as being gutted. That Tony had taken all the furniture, all the things out of his house, and seemed to be burning those items in this fire pit, which is very suspicious, but it's circumstantial. Defense witnesses included Nicole Thomas, Micheline Miller, and Amber Bunting, but they were not present to testify. However, Amber Bunting had given conflicting statements to law enforcement and to a private investigator working the case. One of the investigators on the case, a man named Kessler, died suddenly. After his death, the case against Tony was dismissed. To date, no one has been convicted for murdering Jonathan Skaggs. Kessler, who had been a long-time law enforcement member in this Fayette County area, had told others that Jonathan Skaggs' case was the case that haunted him, and he'd really hoped to solve it. Unfortunately for Skaggs' family, they still don't have a full picture or the true story of what happened to their loved one, which is very disturbing. And it's one of those cases that sadly seems like there's some evidence, but it's circumstantial and there's just not enough to seal the deal and get a conviction. And, I don't like cases like that. I think a lot of us find those incredibly frustrating. Told you from the start, this was a case that would frustrate you. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Mountain Murders. I have a great episode coming up for you this weekend. We will be traveling August to the state of Maryland. So that's exciting. We'll be wrapping up West Virginia this weekend, and then we will be getting into Maryland. I think we have some listeners up there in that part of the country, in the Mid-Atlantic area. So hopefully you'll enjoy hearing some cases from Maryland. All right, going to wrap it up. Just remember, if you want to support the podcast, patreon.com/Mountain Murders Podcast. And hopefully we will get into that Instagram account. If not, I will spread the word and you can follow a brand new account. But like I said, I'll let you know. Still trying to get hacked into this account. I tell you, switching over phones was a huge mistake. Or maybe I should just start keeping better track of my passwords. I don't know. Hope you guys have a great week and enjoy the weekend.